Hello everyone. The first topic that we are going to cover today in this online lecture is neurohumoral transmission in the CNS. With this topic, we are going to start the third unit of your pharmacology syllabus. And this is the first topic in that syllabus. It is a minor topic. There are only small questions possible from this, like what do you understand by neurohumoral transmission, briefly explain the process of neurohumoral transmission with the help of a flow chart, or what do you understand by neurotransmitter, explain the criteria for any substance to be defined as a neurotransmitter, or there can be a question on classify the neurotransmitter present in the CNS, explain anyone like say GABA or norepinephrine or acetylcholine in detail. So coming back to the topic, the first thing that we need to understand is what is the meaning of neurohumoral transmission. Neurohumoral transmission refers to the transmission of nerve impulse through synapse here and neuroeffector junction by the release of chemical substances. Like here in this case, it is acetylcholine. It is different from the term nerve conduction, which stands for the passage of an impulse along axon of a single neuron here. So when a nerve impulse generated here reaches up to the end of the presynaptic neuron, up to here, this is known as nerve conduction. But once the nerve impulse reaches here, which leads to release of chemical substance which acts on the postsynaptic neuron. This phenomena is actually what we call as neurohumoral transmission. So if we talk about the neurohumoral transmission, the chemical substance here which is released at the synapse is called a neurotransmitter, right? You all know that such substances are known as neurotransmitters. We have studied them while we were studying the pharmacology of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so here we can see that they have shown the example of release of acetylcholine from the presynaptic nerve terminal, which affects the postsynaptic neuron. Now, in case of CNS, the second thing which is important for us to note that the effector cell is the nerve cell itself because it is a nervous system. So the effector cell is the nerve cell itself. In case of peripheral nervous system, the effector cells were smooth muscles, glands, etc. However, in this case, it is the neuron itself. Third thing that is important to understand in the neurohumoral transmission, particularly in the CNS, that this neurotransmitter which is released from the nerve terminal acts on this effector cell through receptors. And in the CNS, there are only two types of receptors that are activated by these neurotransmitters. The first type is what we call as ion channels, and the second type is what we call as G protein coupled receptors, also known as metabotropic receptors. Thirdly, while acetylcholine here we call it as a neurotransmitter, not every chemical substance present in the brain is a neurotransmitter. For a substance to be called as neurotransmitter, it has to satisfy a particular criteria, right? So for a substance to be called as a neurotransmitter in the CNS, there are four things that it must have. First of all, the substance along with its enzymes required for the biosynthesis, biosynthetic enzymes, must be present in the CNS at the sites where they are expected to act. So, presence of dopamine and its synthetic bioenzymes makes a particular neuron to be known as dopaminergic neuron. They should be present near the dopaminergic neuron, right? Secondly, they must be released in high amounts from the presynaptic terminals when a particular nerve where their neurotransmitter is stimulated. So, if you stimulate cholinergic neurons, it will lead to release of acetylcholine in high amounts, right? Thirdly, if there is no nerve stimulation, means if you do not stimulate a cholinergic neuron, but you administer exogenously acetylcholine, it should be capable of producing responses identical to the response of nerve stimulation, right? Lastly, there should be a mechanism in the synaptic cleft that once the neurotransmitter has acted on the effector neuron in the CNS, it should be removed from the synapse, either by reuptake or by enzymatic degradation. So unless any substance satisfies these four criteria, it cannot be called a neurotransmitter in the CNS. Of course, with a few exceptions, which we will deal with whenever they come across in the later chapters, right? So these are the neurotransmitters which are released and they act on the receptors, which we say are of two types, either ion channels or G protein coupled receptors present in the CNS, right? Before we go and talk about these receptors, one thing is very important that we should know. That is, all CNS effects, no matter how complex, are a result of change of ionic balance. It is only the change of ionic level that leads to different complex CNS effects. And these change in ionic levels result due to opening or closing of ion channels, right? So in the receptors, if you talk about receptors in CNS, all neurotransmitters present in the CNS ultimately act. How they act? They act by affecting the ionic conductance, and they do so by binding either directly to ion channels or indirectly through GPCR, G protein coupled receptors. There are two types of ion channels which are affected in the neurons. One are known as voltage gated ion channels, and the second type are known as ligand gated ion channels. So it can be either a voltage gated channel or it can be a ligand gated ion channel, and or they can act indirectly through a G protein coupled receptors, also known as metabotropic receptors. How that happens is by these four mechanisms A, B, C, D. So the four mechanisms shown here are: A is a voltage gated ion channel, B is a ligand gated ion channel, C is a G protein coupled receptor, and D is also a G protein coupled receptors but with slightly different mechanism. So how the neurotransmission affects the ionic balance, which leads to production of different effects in the brain. Part A shows a voltage gated ion channels, which are very common, especially on the initial segments of the axon. You must have studied that there are voltage gated sodium channels on the axon, and whenever a nerve is stimulated, this voltage gated sodium channels are activated, leading to influx of sodium and ultimately impulse conduction. So voltage gated sodium channels, ion channels, mainly play a role in the conduction of nerve impulse upon neuronal stimulation. The part B here shows are ligand gated ion channels. Ligand gated ion channels, which are also known as ionotropic receptors, are the ion channels which are integrated with a receptor binding site. So they have a receptor binding site. They are not sensitive to change in voltage. Rather, they are activated by binding of a particular ligand, which can be a neurotransmitter, and leading to opening of these channels, which are here shown close, opening of these channels. The example is chloride channel. Chloride channel is an anionic channel which conducts chloride ion, leads to influx of chloride ions in the neuron whenever they are activated. And these chloride channels contain a binding site for a chemical substance known as GABA. GABA is a very common neurotransmitter present in the brain, known as gamma amino butyric acid, right? So other than voltage gated and ligand gated ion channels, the third type we are talked about are G protein coupled receptors. So this is a receptor coupled with a G protein, Again, here is a receptor coupled with a G protein. Now these G protein coupled receptors can act by two mechanisms, right? The first mechanism is where the G protein coupled receptors affects the ion channels by direct action of G protein. Here this G protein is directly affecting the change in, brings about the change in voltage. This change in voltage leads to opening of this voltage gated ion channel, right? And this mechanism occurs on the membrane. This is a brief effect. This is a brief effect, which is a short lasting effect, and this effect is known as membrane delimited effect. Membrane delimited effect. The second type mechanism by which G protein coupled receptor can affect the ion channels, here it is a ligand gated ion channel, is by enzymatic production of secondary messengers, or what we call as diffusible messengers. So whenever a G protein coupled receptor is activated, this G protein will activate some enzyme, for example adenyl cyclase, which will lead to production of a diffusible messenger, for example cyclic AMP. This cyclic AMP can go and bind to this ion channel and lead to activation of this ion channel. For example, in this case it can lead to influx of calcium. So increased intracellular calcium level is observed whenever a CAMP associated G protein coupled receptor is activated in the CNS. So these are the four mechanisms by which ionic conductance is affected by the neurotransmitters, by either through change in voltage, or either by opening of voltage or ligand gated ion channels, or directly or indirectly by activation of these channels through G protein coupled receptors, right? So as a whole, if you look at the process of neurohumoral transmission, the action potential in presynaptic neuron is generated upon the stimulation of the nerve. This action potential, this is the initiation of the neurohumoral transmission. Nerve stimulation leading to generation of action potential in the presynaptic neuron. This activation of presynaptic neuron leads to activation of voltage gated calcium channel at the nerve terminal and terminal once the impulse is conducted. This activation of calcium channel leads to influx of the calcium. As a result of increased intracellular calcium level, there is fusion of synaptic vesicles. Synaptic vesicles are small vesicles inside the nerve terminal which contain neurotransmitter with the synaptic neuronal membrane. As a result, the neurotransmitter is released in the synaptic cleft. This released neurotransmitter is then diffuses and binds to postsynaptic neuronal receptor. Here you have to remember that in case of CNS, this postsynaptic neuronal receptor is not only a postganglionic fiber, it is also the effector cell, means the cell which has to be either activated or inhibited in the process of neurotransmission, right? And lastly, when it binds to this effector cell, there is change in ionic conductance by one of the following four mechanisms which we have discussed. So this change in the ionic conductance can bring in change either in the conduction of cations or anions. So when cations conduction is affected, what will happen? There will be influx of cations like sodium and calcium. Sodium and calcium. So when sodium and calcium influx occurs, what happens to the nerve membrane? A neuron which was resting in the resting stage at minus 70 millivolt will move towards the positive side. Its potential will move towards the positive side. So opening of the cationic channels like sodium and calcium will bring in positive change in the membrane potential. On the other hand, opening of the anionic channels like chloride channel will bring in the negative change in the membrane potential. There is one exception to cationic ions, that is potassium channel. Whenever potassium channels are open, there is efflux of potassium from inside to the outside. There is efflux of potassium from the inside to the outside. And as a result, when the cation moves from inside to the outside, the membrane becomes more negative. So we are here talking about four different cases of change in ionic conduction. If the sodium channel open, there will be influx of sodium, membrane potential will become more positive. If the calcium channel open, there will be influx of calcium, membrane potential will become more positive. If the chloride channel open, there will be influx of chloride, membrane potential will become more negative, more negative. Or if there is opening of potassium channel, it will lead to efflux of potassium and the membrane will become more negative, right? So what is the end result of this positive and negative change in the neuron membrane potential? What happens due to this? This change in postsynaptic potential, whenever calcium channel or sodium channel are opened, for example, this potential here, it shows a change in potential whenever here, it shows a change in potential whenever sodium and calcium channels are open. So the membrane potential has moved towards a more positive side here, more positive side. If this change is big enough, it will move the resting membrane potential beyond the threshold, leading to the activation of the neuron. This activation of neuron can result from this positive change. So this kind of postsynaptic potential resulting from the activation of calcium or sodium channel is known as excitatory postsynaptic potential or EPSP. On the other hand, if there is opening of the potassium channels or chloride channel here, it will take the potential, the resting membrane potential towards the more negative side. It will move towards the more negative side here, taking it even more farther away, taking it even farther away from the resting membrane threshold or the excitation threshold, and excitation of the membrane will become even more difficult, ultimately leading to inhibition of the neuronal transmission in the CNS. And this type of potential is known as inhibitory postsynaptic potential or IPSP. So this is not only the case with the neurotransmission, but exogenous application of such neurotransmitters or drugs which can mimic the effect of such neurotransmitters can also produce similar EPSP and IPSP, thereby activating and suppressing functions of specific neurons in the CNS. Like, for example, there's a drug called alprazolam. It is a analog of a neurotransmitter in the brain called GABA, right? It is marketed with the brand name Alprex. If you take alprazolam, it can lead to opening of GABA associated chloride channel, which will produce an inhibitory postsynaptic potential, right? And because of this, it can inhibit the specific neurons in the specific brain sites. Therefore, because of this effect, alprazolam is used as a sedative for the induction of sleep because of its inhibitory effect on the CNS. And similar molecules which have similar effect like alprazolam, like diazepam, are also used for the suppression of epilepsy. They are known as anti-epileptic drugs. We'll study how these drugs act and what are the different classes of drugs which act through different IPSP and EPSP when we'll study the effect different drugs used in the treatment of various CNS disorders. So these are different types of neurotransmitter. There are various types of neurotransmitters present in the brain which can produce either IPSP and EPSP. And the neurotransmitters are also classified based on this principle, right? So the neurotransmitters present in the CNS can be classified either on the basis of the nature of their effect. They can be either excitatory like glutamate, or they can be inhibitory like GABA or glycine, right? But the most common classification which is used is based on the chemical nature of the neurotransmitters. This is the most common classification of the neurotransmitters. So before we talk about neurotransmitters, first thing that we need to understand is that what we have studied till now, we need to just review it. So we studied the neurohumoral transmission. Neurohumoral transmission is the process in which the two neurons are communicate with each other uh, by transmitting impulse through their synapse and neuroeffector junction by the release of chemical substances. These chemical substances are known as neurotransmitters. And in the CNS, the effector cell, like in the PNS, the effector cell is either muscle cell or gland. In the CNS, the effector cell can be either a nerve cell, it cannot be either. It is definitely a nerve cell, and the receptors by which they act are either ion channels or GPCR. But not all substances released in the brain are neurotransmitter. For a substance to be a neurotransmitter in the CNS, it has to satisfy the four conditions. It should be present in the nerve cell. It should be released upon nerve stimulation. Even in the absence of nerve stimulation, if you give it exogenously, it should produce the similar response. And lastly, once it has produced its effect, there should be a mechanism for its removal by reuptake or enzymatic degradation. These neurotransmitters which are released act through two mechanisms, either through ion channels or G protein coupled receptors. In both cases, they will only affect the ionic conductance, either acting through voltage gated ion channels or ligand gated ion channels, or through GPCR through membrane delimited effect, or by secondary messenger effect. Ultimately, this is the process which takes place in the neurotransmission in the CNS. Whenever a nerve is stimulated, there is an action potential generation which is conducted up to the nerve terminal of the presynaptic neuron. In the presynaptic neuron, there is activation of calcium channel. This activation of calcium channels leads to fusion of the vesicles present in the presynaptic neuron. These vesicles contain neurotransmitters, and once they fuse with the membrane, they release the neurotransmitter. That released neurotransmitter diffuses and goes and acts on the postsynaptic receptors. This activation of the postsynaptic receptor leads to change in ionic conductance. This change in ionic conductance can be either positive or negative. So there can be either positive change in postsynaptic potential or negative change. If it's a positive change, it will bring the potential nearer to the threshold and known as EPSP, excitatory postsynaptic potential. If it's a negative change, it will take it away from the threshold, leading to inhibition of the neuron, known as inhibitory postsynaptic potential. And this is the principle which has been exploited for the development of drugs. So different neurotransmitters are present in different parts of the brain and spinal cord. At different sites, they produce different effect, regulate different function, and the drugs mimicking the effect of a particular neurotransmitter can produce similar EPSP and IPSP and produce the similar effect in the brain. For example, alprazolam can open chloride channel and lead to production of IPSP, and it is used as a sedative for the induction of sleep due to its inhibitory effect on the general neurons in the brain. These neurotransmitters which produce EPSP and IPSP at various locations in the brain are either classified based on their effect. They can be either excitatory or inhibitory, or they are classified based on their chemical nature. The classification based on chemical nature is the most common classification, and this is that classification. There are four major classes which you will encounter in the topics that you are going to study in your syllabus. The first and the most common class of neurotransmitter present in the brain are the amino acids. They can be dicarboxylic amino acids or monocarboxylic amino acids. Here you have to understand that the dicarboxylic amino acids are mainly, the dicarboxylic amino acids are mainly excitatory in nature, whereas monocarboxylic amino acids are mainly inhibitory in nature. The dicarboxylic amino acids include glutamate, aspartate. Monocarboxylic amino acids include GABA, glycine, beta-alanine, and taurine. These four are the more common ones: glutamate, aspartate, GABA, and glycine. The second type of neurotransmitter, which is commonly present in the CNS, is acetylcholine. Third types are amines. Under the amines, the most common class is catecholamines. In fact, this is the only class that we are concerned about. It includes neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, and 5-hydroxytryptamine. The fourth class, which is slightly less important than the first three is neuropeptides. Neuropeptide also act as neurotransmitters. They also act as co-transmitters. Means some of these neuropeptides are released from the same nerve terminals as these three classes, and they produce similar effect but in lesser intensity. The neuropeptides commonly present in the CNS includes opioids like enkephalins and endorphins, neurotensins, substance P, somatostatin, cholecystokinin, vasoactive interstitial peptide, neuropeptide Y, and thyrotropin releasing hormone, which has its own standalone effect in the CNS. Some of them, like substance P and others, are also involved in pain sensation in the CNS as well as in the inflammatory responses in the CNS. Some other neurotransmitters which you will encounter in the topic and but are the minor have minor importance as per your syllabus include nitric oxides and endocannabinoids. So we have to study these neurotransmitters in detail. Some of them we'll take up in detail in our next lecture and study about them, what is their effect, how they are synthesized and released. Others we will come across them when we'll study the drugs uh, which act through one of the pathways involving any particular neurotransmitters. So this is all for the first lecture. In the next lecture, we'll cover individual neurotransmitter which are of relevance as per your syllabus. And till then, uh, stay home, stay safe. Thank you for your patience, and just have faith in Almighty. Thank you and goodbye.